We don't think too much about what competitors are doing.
Yeah.
Just because I think it's important to be just focused on making the best possible products. It's sort of maybe analogous to what they say about if you're in a race.
Yeah.
Don't worry about what the other runners are doing.
Yeah.
Just run.
What is the likelihood that you personally will go to Mars?
70%. We've recently made a number of breakthroughs that I'm just really fired up about.
And when does that happen? In our lifetimes?
Yeah. I'm talking about moving there. So it's like if you get the price per ticket maybe around $200,000.
This could be an escape hatch for rich people.
No. Your probability of dying on Mars is much higher than Earth. Really, the app of going to Mars would be like Shackleton's app of going to the Antarctic. It's going to be hard. There's a good chance of death. Going in a little can through deep space. You might land successfully. Once you land successfully, there will be you'll be working non-stop to build the base. So you're not much time for leisure. And once you get there, even after doing all this, there's a very harsh environment, so there's a good chance you die there. We think you can come back, but we're not sure. Now, does that sound like an escape hatch for rich people?
And yet you would unhesitatingly go.
There's lots of people that climb mountains. Why do they climb mountains? Because people die on Mount Everest all the time. They like doing it for the challenge. It's very important to seek out, to actively seek out and listen very carefully to negative feedback. And this is something that people tend to avoid because it's painful.
Yeah.
But I think this is a very common mistake, is to not actively seek out and listen to negative feedback.
Where do you do that? Do you go into forums? Do you go into Twitter? Like, what are your areas where you go to look for feedback on, let's say, the Tesla?
Well, it's like everyone I talk to is, in fact, when friends get a product, I say, look, don't tell me what you like, tell me what you don't like.
Right.
And because otherwise your friend is not going to tell you what he doesn't like.
Right.
He's going to say, oh, I love this and that, and then leave out the this is the stuff I don't like list. Because he wants to be your friend, it doesn't want to offend you. So you really need to sort of coax negative feedback. And you know that if somebody is your friend, or at least not your enemy, and they're giving you negative feedback, then they may be wrong, but it's coming from a good place. And sometimes even your enemies give you good negative feedback. When I started the first internet company, Zip2, with my brother and another person, Greg Curry, it wasn't really with the thought of being wealthy. I've got nothing against being wealthy, but
we'll get back to that later too.
but it's just it was just from the standpoint of wanting to be part of the internet, and I figured if we could make enough money to just get by, that would be okay. And when we started off, we literally only had like one computer, and so it would be our web server during the day, and I'd code at night. And we just got a small office in Palo Alto back when rent was not insane, and it cost us like $450 a month. It was cheaper than an apartment, so we actually just slept in the office and then showered at the YMCA on Page Mill, El Camino. So we'd walk over there and shower, and that was actually, I think that was when I first met you, by the way. So I don't know how many people, probably not many people know this, but we actually pitched Steve in like January '96 on the Zip2 business plan, and actually I thought Steve was actually one of the most up to speed on what actually was in our business plan. Most of the people we met did not actually read our business plan. In fact, a lot of venture capitalists we met at the time didn't even know what the internet was. They'd never used it.
Sure,
and didn't think
I'm not sure if we still do.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm talking like sort of well-known people in Sand Hill. I was like, wow, okay. But at the time, nobody had made any money on the internet, so I guess that's it wasn't really clear evidence that there was a business. I mean, I should say that, when I was a kid, I didn't really have any grand designs. I mean, the reason I started programming computers is because I like computer games. And I play lots of computer games, and I learned that if I wrote software and sold it, then I could get more money and buy better computers. So it wasn't really with some grand vision or anything. When I was growing up, I'd read lots of books, and they were very often set in the United States, and it seemed like a lot of new technology was being developed in the United States. So I thought, okay, I really want to work on new technology, so I want to get to Silicon Valley. When I was growing up, Silicon Valley seemed like some sort of mythical place, like Mount Olympus or something. I came to the conclusion that my initial premise was wrong, that in fact there's a great deal of will. There's not such a shortage, but people don't think there's a way, and that if people thought there was a way, or at least something that wouldn't break the federal budget, then people would support it. Which, in retrospect, I think is actually kind of obvious, because the United States is a distillation of the human spirit of exploration. Mm-hmm. People came here from other places. It's there's no nation that's more a nation of explorers than the United States, but people need to believe that it's possible, and that it's not. They don't have to give up like healthcare or something important. Right. It's got to be that's important. So I thought, okay, well, then it's not a question of will. It's a question of showing that there's a way.
In the beginning, nobody wanted a Tesla. I can tell you that. When we made the original sort of roadster sports car, people were like, well, why would I want an electric car? My gasoline car works fine. I'm like, no, electric car is better. I should try it. And it was hard to get people to do a test drive. First of all, nobody knew who we were. They never heard of this company. I'm like, yeah, we're named after Nikola Tesla. You know that guy? Nope. So for sure we were doing push in the beginning, because people said there was no one telling us that they wanted an electric car. So it was not out of like, it was like lots of people coming up to me saying, hey, I really want an electric car. I heard that 0 times. So people were like, it's like, man, we better make an electric car and show that these things can be good, and then people will want them. It's like, I think it was like Henry Ford said, like when we talk about the Model T, it's like if you asked the public what they wanted, they'd say a faster horse. Mm-hmm. So if you did like a big survey and said, hey, public, before automobiles, what would you like? It's like, well, I'd like my horse to go 3 miles an hour faster and eat less food and, be stronger and live longer and that kind of thing. There'll all be basically a bunch of incremental improvements on horse. Because people, when you say like, well, what about an automobile, that car that drives itself? Like, what are you talking about? That sounds crazy. But when you actually make an automobile and give it to people and say, okay, now this is a horse where you can keep it in the barn, and if you leave for a month, it's still alive. Yeah. So carry more weight than a horse and go further and that kind of thing. So, it's like when it's a radically new product, people don't know that they want it because it's just not in their scope. I think when they first started making TVs, they did a nationwide survey. I think this might have been like 46 or 48. It was like a famous nationwide survey. Will you ever buy a TV? And it was like 96% of respondents said no. Some crazy number. Like basically everyone's like, would you buy a TV? And maybe they put a price in there or something, I don't know. But it was famously, almost everyone said they would not buy a TV, but they didn't know what they're talking about.
So the big game-changing stuff at the beginning is a company push kind of a thing most of the time, but then changes to the product over time can be a lot more customer pull kind of a focus.
Yeah, changes to the product over time can be incremental changes. Then customers can certainly tell you, it's good to get customer feedback to say, how can we improve the product? And once they're using it, they can say, okay, I like this thing about it, I don't like this other thing, and then we can improve the product over time. Customer feedback after they have the fundamental thing is great. When trying different things, you've got to have some acceptance of failure, as you were alluding to earlier. Failure must be an option. If failure is not an option, it's going to result in extremely conservative choices, and you may get something even worse than lack of innovation. Things may go backwards. If what you really want is you want reward and punishment to be proportionate to the actions that you seek. So if what you're seeking is innovation, then you should reward success in innovation, and only there should be minor consequences for trying and failing. There should be minor. With significant rewards for trying and succeeding, minor consequences for trying and not succeeding, and major negative consequences for not trying.
Maybe I'll just blank out the word doubt. No, I mean, to be totally frank, I doubted us too. So I thought we, had maybe, when starting SpaceX, maybe had a 10% chance of reaching orbit. So to those who doubted us, I was like, well, I think you're probably right. I mean, the number of times that I was told, like, because I was taking the money that I earned from PayPal and rolling it into to create SpaceX and Tesla, and I ended up spending it all. It wasn't the intention, but almost both companies went bankrupt. Frankly, 2008 was a tough year. It took us 4 attempts just to get to orbit with Falcon 1. But a lot of times people would tell me this joke, like, how do you make a small fortune in the rocket industry? You start with a large one, is the punchline. And I was like, okay, I already heard that joke 12,000 times, Anyway, and it almost came true. We just barely made it there, that 4th launch of Falcon 1. That's all the money we had for that 4th launch. And then, and that wasn't even enough to save the company. We also then had to win the NASA cargo resupply contract. So that came a little after, a little bit later, or right towards the end of 2008. Those are the 2 key things that saved SpaceX. Otherwise, we would have, not made it. So yeah, I think those doubters their probability assessment was correct. But fortunately, fate has smiled upon us and brought us to this day.
As you look back on your career in the space industry, what has been the most surprising or unexpected challenge that you faced? And along those lines, if you were to go back in time and talk to your 20-year-old self, would you do anything differently?
Go back in time to your 20-year-old self.
I mean, I think I think it would make far fewer mistakes. Obviously, if I could go, like, here's a list of all the dumb things you're about to do. Please do not do them.
Wouldn't we all?
It'd be a very long list, and like, here, let me write it down or something. I mean, it's hindsight's 20/20, so it's hard to say. I mean, I've made so many foolish mistakes. I have lost count, honestly. I mean, some of these things I just wish like that's simple sort of mantra, management by rhyming. I mean, it worked for Homer, okay? Management by rhyming is that thing I was saying, like, if the schedule is long, the design is wrong. We've overcomplicated the design many times. And I think we should have just gone with a simpler design, with the acid test being, how long will it take for this to fly? And if it's going to take a long time, don't do it. Do something else.
I think one thing that's important is if you have a choice of a lower valuation with someone you really like, or a higher valuation with someone you have a question mark about, take the lower valuation. It's better to have a higher quality venture capitalist who you think would be great to work with than to get a higher valuation with someone where there's even a question mark, really. I think that's important. It's sort of like getting married, I mean, the way I tend to view problems is from a physics standpoint. I think physics is a good analytical framework, and one of the key things in physics is to reason from first principles. This is contrary to the way most human reasoning takes place, which is by analogy. Reasoning from first principles just means that you figure out what are the fundamental truths or things that people are pretty sure are fundamental truths. And can you build up to a conclusion from that, from those principles, and then certainly if you come up with some idea and it appears to violate one of those fundamental truths, then you're probably wrong, or you should get a really big prize or something like that. So this may seem like, I don't know, it may seem sort of obvious when it's explained, but it's actually not what people do. Reasoning by analogies is helpful because it's a shortcut.
Yeah.
And it's mostly correct, but it tends to be most incorrect when you're dealing with new things, because it's hard to analogize to something really new.
Tesla really faced a severe threat of death due to the Model 3 production ramp. Essentially, the company was bleeding money like crazy, and just if we didn't solve these problems in a very short period of time, we would die. And it was extremely difficult to solve them.
How close to death did you come?
Within single-digit weeks.
22 hours a day, or like how many
I
hours?
was working, so 7 days a week, sleeping in the factory. I worked in the paint shop, general assembly, body shop.
Do you ever worry about yourself imploding? Like it's just too much?
Absolutely. No one should put this many hours into work. This is not good. And people should not work this hard. They should not do this. It's very painful.
Painful in what sense?
It hurts my brain and my heart.
And you started with a much smaller rocket, the Falcon 1. And was your goal at that point, when you started with Falcon 1, to get to the point where we had 9 engines for Falcon 9? Was that your goal at that time?
When I started SpaceX, I only thought there was maybe a 10% chance of getting Falcon 1 to orbit. I did not at all think that this would happen. So this is for sure a dream come true. But I literally at the time I didn't know anything about rockets, and I've been the chief engineer of SpaceX since day one, and I don't really know anything about rockets, which is why the first 3 rockets failed.
Right.
And then
so the first 3 Falcon 1s for SpaceX were failures.
Yes.
And then tell me about the fourth one.
The fourth one, so I'd actually only had enough money for 3 flights. So I had no more money left, and we managed the team sort of rallied, and we managed to put together enough spare parts to do a 4th launch, and that 4th launch was successful. And then
so what would have happened if it wasn't successful?
Oh, well, SpaceX would have died.
So we would not be here right now, at this moment, getting ready to launch Crew Dragon to the International System.
We've got a lot of work to do because we've got a lot of service centers and charge stations to construct. So mostly it's like we're trying to build our service and charge infrastructure as fast as possible. And I know this, like some of the customers who have ordered a car, they're not in the major cities, so they're a little unhappy with us because we are delaying delivery of their car. In fact, I'm going to apologize to some of them personally and explain the reason we are delaying delivery is because we really want them to have a good experience. But if they're too far from a service center and the charging is not sorted out, then they will not have a good experience. So we're going to delay the cars just for a few months to make sure that they have a good experience. I think it's also important to reason from first principles rather than by analogy. So the normal way that we conduct our lives is we reason by analogy. We're doing this because it's like something else that was done, or it's like what other people are doing.
Me Too type ideas.
Yeah, slight iterations on a theme, and it's kind of mentally easier to reason by analogy rather than from first principles. But by first principles is kind of a physics way of looking at the world. And what that really means is you kind of boil things down to the most fundamental truths and say, okay, what are we sure is true, or as sure as possible is true? And then reason up from there. That takes a lot more mental energy.
Give me an example of that. Like, what's one thing that you've done that on that you feel has worked for you?
Sure. So somebody could say, in fact people do, that battery packs are really expensive and that's just the way they'll always be, because that's the way they've been in the past. You're like, well, no, that's pretty dumb, because if you applied that reasoning to anything new, then you wouldn't be able to ever get to that new thing.
Right.
You are unusually fearless and willing to go in the face of other people telling you something that's crazy. And I know a lot of pretty crazy people, you still stand out. Where does that come from, or how do you think about making a decision when everyone tells you this is a crazy idea? Or where do you get the internal strength to do that?
Well, first of all, I'd say I actually think I feel fear quite strongly. So it's not as though I just have the absence of fear. I feel it quite strongly. But there are just times when something is important enough, you believe in it enough, that you do it in spite of the fear.
So speaking of important things,
like people shouldn't think people shouldn't think, well, I feel fear about this and therefore I shouldn't do it. It's normal to feel fear. Like there'd have to be something mentally wrong if you didn't feel fear.
So you just feel it and let the importance of it drive you to do it anyway.
Yeah, actually something that can be helpful is fatalism to some degree. If you just accept the probabilities, then that diminishes fear. When starting SpaceX, I thought the odds of success were less than 10%. And I just accepted that actually probably I would just lose everything. But that maybe would make some progress. If we could just move the ball forward, even if we died, maybe some other company could pick up the baton and keep moving it forward, so that would still do some good. Same with Tesla. I thought the odds of a car company succeeding were extremely low.
This is widely regarded as one of the most robotics-driven auto assembly lines on the planet.
Elon, part of the thing I heard about the Model 3 is that there's too many robots. That maybe
I agree.
You think so too? That maybe you need more people in here working.
We do.
In some cases, the robots actually slow the production, right?
Yes, they did. We had this crazy complex network of conveyor belts, and it was not working. So we got rid of that whole thing.
This is cool, Elon.
Yeah.
Realizing it needed an overhaul, Musk personally took over the Model 3 production line at the beginning of April.
They're aiming for really extreme levels of precision, more than any other vehicle in the world.
He says he has resorted to pulling all-nighters at the plant.
When things get really intense, I don't have time to go home and shower and change, so I just sleep here.
I want to see. Where's that?
Oh, yeah. So
I want to
I
see.
mean, it's pretty boring overall, really.
It's actually cold in here too.
Yeah, I like it cold.
So you like it cold?
I sleep on the couch over there.
So you're just laying here on the couch?
Yeah. Last time I was here, I actually slept literally on the floor because the couch was too narrow.
Yeah, I was going to say. And Elon, I have to say, it's not even a comfortable couch either.
No, it's terrible. This is not a good couch.
Musk feels like all the overtime is paying off. And now he says the Model 3 line is back on track.
And we're able to unlock some of the critical things that were holding us back from reaching 2,000 cars a week. But since then, we've continued to do 2,000 cars a week.
Do you think that this is sustainable? This pace is sustainable?